All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. This is DFS Army's tournament strategy show. It's been a bit, guys. We had the NBA All-Star break. I feel like, what is it that people say? Absence makes the heart grow fonder. So, I'm glad to be back. It should be fun. Good last final third of the season. Dixon, I see you. I'm pumped up too. I'm not gonna read through that, but I know what you're saying, man. We're gonna experience some pain. When we have a little bit of a break, it's easy to remember the positives and the awesome wins, but the NBA has a lot of issues with it. But it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun, and I'm glad Vaughn's gone as well. Tattoo, good to see you in here. I hope everyone had a good break. But we have a large slate today, guys, so we can't waste too much time. We gotta jump right into it. And on this show, we'll go game by game and just kind of game plan guys I plan on being over the field on, which is over the projected ownership rate, potential leverage plays, guys that I don't like too much, just game situations that I don't like as much either. And then, of course, on the pre-lock show, which is at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, myself and maybe Brandon B-Dubs will be able to join that show as well. And that's for VIP members only. If you're interested in that, link is in the description. Glad you had a good break, Tattoo. All right, let's jump right into it. Starting off, we have the Nets going up against the Raptors. For the Nets, looking pretty healthy at this point, which makes them not a very interesting team to play just because they utilize a lot of players on their team. So there aren't too many guys who are seeing too many minutes who I feel like are not priced correctly. So no one's really standing out here for me. I think Claxton is interesting just because I like picking on the Raptors front court these days. Bridges is viable, but no one that I plan on forcing exposure to as of right now. Interesting pieces, but no one standing out. Similar situation for the Raptors. They're pretty healthy. No one on the injury report. Everyone's priced appropriately. I don't like picking on the Nets too much, but the game environment's fine. The issue here is that no one's standing out enough for me to want to force exposure here. If I get some exposure to Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett quickly, I'm happy with that, but they're not priorities for me on a 10-game slate. Gary Trent Jr. as well at 4K is looking interesting, but there's other guys who are cheaper who I like having a bit more. So if these guys show up, that's okay, but they're not focal points. I'm not building around this game or these teams on this slate. And that's because the next game is way more interesting to me. We have the Pistons going up against the Pacers. Per usual, I like to focus and I like to target on hitting games with the highest total on the slate. And that is this Pistons against the Pacers game. Both of these teams can struggle defensively, but ideally this game can stay a little bit closer. The 12-point spread is terrifying. We know blowouts can really kill you in DFS, but I don't play for blowouts. I never have. I'll let other people be afraid of it. Cade Cunningham, he's had a break, should continue to see more minutes now. 7,600 is just too cheap for the upside he brings to the table. He's getting some decent ownership for a 10-game slate. 15% isn't bad. I plan on being significantly over that. Do not care. Sometimes this burns us, but I'm going to be on it every time. Cade Cunningham, someone I'll have. If he stays at 15% ownership, I'll be at least double the field there. Jalen Duren, I like at 7K. I feel a little bit better about him if Isaiah Stewart ends up getting ruled out. Isaiah Stewart is questionable as of right now, but I wouldn't be shocked if he plays tonight. You can also look at Ivy, Asar Thompson, Fontecchio. They're all viable options, but again, not priorities for me on 10 gamers. On 10-game slates, I really like to just focus on who I like, and I let the domination station do the rest. Every now and again, as we get closer to lock, there might be guys who start to show up for me a little bit more, or that I feel like if ownership's starting to move their way, I might force some exposure to a few of these guys. But again, highest total on the slate. I want these guys to show up, but as of right now, I'm not going to force it. It's okay. I forgive your caps lock. Alan, what's up, man? Michael Ortiz, good to see you. Zolo said, hoping you had a good break. It was a good break. Played a little bit of MMA, a little bit of NASCAR. It was fun. Thomas, good to see you, man. Matherin versus Ivy. They're really trying to make this a thing. So I thought he did, but to be honest, I didn't really follow it too much. I know he got into that altercation, but I didn't follow the details of it. So yeah, that's what I'm doing with the Pistons tonight. I like this team a lot. Gonna have a shit ton of Cade Cunningham. Now we have the other side of this game. We have for the Pacers, Miles Turner was not on the injury report. Mathurin was not on the injury report, so they're looking pretty healthy there. Jalen Smith is questionable. He's dealing with a back injury. If he gets ruled out, I start to feel better about some of the plays for the Pacers. Tyrese Halliburton is a guy I'm going to force exposure to. Again, I always do this for high total games. Totally fine with that. Pascal Siakam is viable, but I just think there's better plays on the slate, so I'm not going to force exposure there. Miles Turner, I'm nervous about. I like playing bigs against the Pistons. They have struggled against centers, but we know Turner can burn us when he's chalky in particular. He can get into foul trouble. Every player can do that, but Turner just tends to do it a little bit more than others. So I'm a little nervous, but every stat, every model I look at is pushing Turner, and so again, I'm not trying to get away from the highest total on the slate. Mathurin also scares the absolute hell out of me, but with Nesmith out, it should clean things up a little bit more for him to see more consistent minutes. We know he has the rivalry going with Ivy. There's some drama there. I'm open to it. He's extremely chalky, and he's only 4,500, so I'm trying to not overthink it, but it does worry me. But as of right now, because of all the things we talked about already about this game environment, I'm willing to eat the chalk here. Nimbard is a viable pivot option, in my opinion. Would be comfortable with him showing up, and he is showing up a little bit for me in some of my early runs. Not really looking at the other options here. Toppin would be slightly more viable if Smith gets ruled out, but would need that to happen before I pull the trigger on that. All right, next up we have the Knicks against the Sixers. This is a game I thought I would like more than I do. The matchup against the Sixers isn't one to really worry about when Joel Embiid is out. Their defense as a whole just falls when that happens. Not a ton of new injury news to talk about with the Knicks. So nothing's really pushing any of these guys in a direction where I feel like I have to play them. They're all priced pretty appropriately in my mind. There's not really anyone I'm looking at and saying they're too cheap. If I'm 150 maxing, which I'm planning on 20 maxing today, by the way, but if I was 150 maxing, I would want at least a little bit of exposure to guys like Jalen Brunson and Dante DiVincenzo. Even Josh Hart would potentially make that list, but Brunson and Dante for sure. Just because we know the upside is there for their price tag, a little cheap. But for 20 max, I don't feel like I have to have exposure to the Knicks tonight. Similar situation with the Sixers, but a bit more interesting. No new injury news worth talking about here. But Tyrese Maxey's a little cheap at 9,100. He's very risky and streaky. Not someone we can trust. But again, if I'm 150 maxing, I want a little bit of exposure to Maxey and Brunson. Just because I like the close spread. Game total's not bad at 228. I think there's a viable shot worth taking here. But ultimately, the only guy in my 20 max lines as of right now that I'm going to force exposure to is Buddy Hield. He's been really good since joining this team, and he's still only 6,700. Once he gets into that 7K range, I'm a little bit less excited about it. But for now, I'm open to taking shots on him. And so I am willing to force exposure to Hield if he doesn't show up naturally. But as of right now, he is showing up for me, so not something I'm overly concerned about. And that's pretty much it for the Sixers and the Knicks. A game that I think could be a little sneaky, but I'm still not trying to completely build around. Yeah, it's a little wild, but I don't know. Tattoo said you didn't play NHL. We're just gonna act like that didn't happen. I'm glad you crushed though, Tattoo. You've been having a very, very great season in the NHL. So if you all are looking for NHL advice, definitely jump into the Discord NHL channel. Tattoo's been speaking some wisdom in there lately. What's up, fam? Hope you're doing all right, Rodney. Glad to be back. Glad you're back too. Takedown was good, man. Agreed. Let's get this money. Let's get the money. The Magic are interesting tonight. So there's a few things here. Markelle Fultz is out. Paolo Banchero is questionable. Whenever Markel Fultz is out, that means we have to go through the struggle of thinking about Jalen Suggs again. Jalen Suggs, not the most consistent player, but he can break slates when he sees more consistent minutes. When Fultz is out, Suggs sees more consistent minutes. Like I just said, matchup isn't great going up against the Cavs. Paolo being questionable is really going to be what makes or breaks this team for me tonight. If Paolo gets ruled out, Franz Wagner, Wendell Carter Jr., Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony, even Mo Wags, all become much more viable for me on this slate. As of right now, I'm trying to fight the temptation to force some exposure, especially the Suggs. But again, if Paolo gets ruled out, I am going to force some exposure here. But for now, I'm not trying to get too cute because I don't like to pick on the Cavs. But you can make a case for quite a few of these guys. Even if Paolo does play, I don't think these are bad plays with Markel Fultz out. This is the lowest game total on the slate, though, and so you're starting to see a little bit of why I'm not forcing exposure here. That usually speaks to not the best game environment. For the Cavs, Donovan Mitchell is questionable. He was at shoot around, though, so not going to dig too much into this. I like Evan Mobley. He's still way too cheap. Darius Garland's also viable at 5,900, assuming they're going to see their regular run now since they've had a little bit of a break. Evan Mobley's not going to be sneaky, unfortunately, but I still plan on at least being around field weight. I'm okay being slightly over the field on him. Darius Garland is someone I will force exposure to if he doesn't show up for me naturally, just because he's too cheap at 5,900. And then, obviously, these guys become core plays if Donovan Mitchell ends up not playing tonight. But again, I'm assuming he does, so that's more of a wait and see. We'll talk about it on the pre-lock show kind of thing. For the Suns, per usual, Bradley Beal is questionable once again. I feel like he's been questionable and or out all season, but it is what it is. He's still battling that hamstring injury. If he plays and we don't get any news around a minutes limit or restriction, I'm willing to take a shot on Bradley Beal at 7,100. If he doesn't play, that makes Devin Booker, Kevin Durant much more viable. It means you can consider taking a shot on a guy like Grayson Allen or Eric Gordon. I'm not trying to take those shots, at least not as of right now. But I would look towards Durant or Booker if Beal does get eliminated or ruled out. But for now, not touching them. This is the second highest total game. So again, that is why I would force exposure to a stud here, especially with the total still staying pretty close. And I would expect it to still stay close even if Beal gets ruled out. For the Mavs, they're healthy. And the good thing about the Mavs being healthy means I don't have to worry about Gafford or Washington or Hardaway or Lively or any of the other role players for this team. But the viable pieces here are Luka and Kyrie, per usual. You can take your shot on Kyrie. I never get overly excited about him when he's 9K, but he's low owned, and that makes him viable. Luka, I'm already forcing exposure to, and I'm going to continue to force that exposure on this slate. Want to be at least around field weight, ideally above it. Tattoo. Yeah, just okay. Just okay. No, you've been crushing it. Rodney said Garland 5,900. Is he a free square? No, he's not a free square. He's one of those plays that you might look back on this slate and be like, that was so fucking obvious. But at 5,900, he hasn't shown that same upside since returning from his injury. He's been playing solid minutes. He's even been seeing 30 minutes in some of his more recent games, but we're still only seeing around 30 to 25 fantasy points, which is good, not bad by any means, but not the upside we're really hoping for here. At 5,900, we would really like to see that 35-point upside at least, which, again, he's only done once since returning from his injury. So he's viable. He's very likely to exceed value. So that's why he's someone I want to be over the field on. But just because we haven't seen him hit that upside consistently yet, it makes it a little hard to trust. And that's why he shouldn't be too popular on this slate either, because he just hasn't been consistent. But I'm playing the shit out of him. Also, game totals low, that thing. Tattoo said, I know we aren't there yet, but I'm forgetful, but I like Marvin Bags when we get to Washington. All right, Tattoo, I see you. We'll get there. For the Clippers, I want to take a shot on one of James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, or Paul George, but ultimately, I'm going to go ahead and take the like off of James Harden. It's really hard for me to make an argument for one of these guys over the other. Also, the game environment's solid. The spread is close, but with these guys being priced the way they are, it's just really hard for me to get overly excited about it. But James Harden is my favorite option out of the three, and it's more so based off of the sim model than anything. If they stay this low owned, though, I want to try and take shots on Harden and PG tonight. It'd be nice if I could make one of them a leverage play, if not both. Especially with them being so low owned, 5% would do it for me. But they're at the bottom of my priority list. I have to just wait and see if I can run lines with them in it with this many games and other guys I'm going to force exposure to. So I'm going to try, but we'll see on the pre-lock show if I'm able to actually get that by the time we get to lock. And then the Thunder. The Thunder are interesting, but ultimately I am not planning on forcing exposure to them. They are healthy per usual, and Gordon Hayward's joining their team. So I'm interested in seeing how they utilize him. I think that makes quite a few guys like Williams, Giddey, a lot less interesting for me. Luke Dort, a lot less interesting. But SGA has been fantastic this season. He is absolutely extremely viable, and he's very low owned. If I was 150 maxing, I would force exposure to SGA tonight, at least 5%. I would be happy with as much as 10%. But as of right now on this slate, he is one of the studs that I'm not forcing exposure to when I'm only running 20 lines. You have to pick your battles. You can't play everybody. It won't, like I said, he's extremely viable, but he just felt he wasn't one of the top priorities for me on this slate. Next up, we have the Celtics going up against the Bulls. For the Celtics tonight, they are pretty healthy. Jaden Springer's questionable, but I don't really care about that. The biggest thing for me is just the form that Tatum's been in. Good game environment. Well, actually, the game environment's not great. It's the second lowest total on the slate. But the Celtics tend to keep these games close. I really like the form that Tatum's been in. Sim model likes Tatum a little bit too at 9,900. And so he's really just the guy that I'm making a priority for me on this slate. Ideally, I'll be double the field. Other pieces, Porzingis and Brown are fine. They're definitely viable. They have some upside, but I'm not going to force exposure to them. Similar situation with the Bulls. A lot of guys in decent spots, but model and matchup leans towards Vucevic, so he's going to be the guy that I'm prioritizing and forcing into my lines. He is pretty chalky already on this slate, so I doubt I'll be able to make him a leverage play, but I do want to be at least around 15-20% on Vucevic tonight. If I'm a little bit above that, not mad at it. Not mad at that at all. All right. Next up, we have the Rockets going up against the Pelicans. Rockets are looking pretty boring tonight. I don't like to pick on the Pelicans in general, but they don't have a ton of interesting injury news that's making them extremely viable tonight. Reggie Bullock is questionable, but that doesn't really move the needle for me too much. Şengün, we know the upside is there, especially at 8,600. But like I said, I don't like picking on the Pelicans. Not a spot I'm trying to force exposure to. Fred VanVleet is showing up a little bit for me in some of my early runs. He's 6,700. He's not overly expensive. We know the upside he brings to the table. He's still not a guy I'm going to force in the lines, though. Like I always say, the Domination Station wants to add him or put him in. I'm not going to X him out. But just from like a price range standpoint, I prefer Buddy Hield, Evan Mobley, Miles Turner. Even I would like to see Ivy show up a little bit in some of those lines that Fred VanVleet is showing up in. So it's okay. I'm not going to go on my way to avoid it, but I don't love this team tonight. Um, all right. For the Pelicans, we finally have some injury news that could spice this slate up a little bit. Brandon Ingram is listed as questionable. He's dealing with an illness like a few players are. Cody Zeller's questionable. That doesn't matter as much for me. Big thing here is if Brandon Ingram gets ruled out, as we talk about all the time, that makes CJ McCollum, Zion Williamson top priorities on this slate. Herb Jones, Trey Murphy obviously see a nice boost too, but top guy here is Zion. He has a higher usage rate. He is more aggressive. He takes a few more shots. At 7,800, just like everyone else would, I would love him in this spot. If Ingram plays, I'm totally fine having exposure to him. I have a like on him currently, but that's more of a wait and see. We just have to see if he plays or not. Herb Jones at 4,600 is a viable value play on this slate. He's just been playing a lot, and that's what we're looking for there in that price range. Typically, he has a little bit of upside, but again, I'm not overly excited about that unless Ingram gets ruled out. All right, finally, have some games I am actually pretty pumped about. And some of these are pretty low owned, and I hope don't get too chalky by the time we get to lock. Takedown said Zion is the lock button. Big boy is going to eat today. I hear you, man. Yeah, I mean, I like Zion. I'm never really big on locks, by the way, takedown, but I don't hate it. You could definitely do worse. So, Hornets Jazz. Let's see. The Hornets are pretty healthy. No real new injury news worth talking about, but let me double check here just in case I'm missing something. Yeah. No real new injury news worth talking about. Matchup against the Jazz, though, is a plus matchup. And I feel like people are sleeping on them a bit. Let me double check and just make sure I'm not just too high on them. Yeah, matchup is solid. Uh, we'll start with Miles Bridges. He's 8,900, so he's pricey. We're not getting him at a discount, but the upside is there. The Jazz are giving up the 10th most points in the league to versatile forwards, which both Brandon Miller and Miles Bridges fall under. So for me, I'm playing Miles Bridges and I'm playing Brandon Miller at super low ownership in a great matchup that's not getting any attention. Both of these are bad teams. The Jazz should be able to win this game pretty easily. The spread is relatively high at 9.5 points, but it wouldn't shock me if the Hornets can keep this a little bit closer than people expect. Nick Richards has a decent matchup here as well, but I strongly prefer other bigs on this slate instead of Nick Richards. But if he shows up a little bit, that's fine. Trey Mann is way too cheap on this slate. 5,500. Pretty neutral matchup against the Jazz, but he's way too cheap for how involved and how consistent he's been here lately. He's seeing 30, 35 minutes a game if the game can stay close since Ball's been out. And so until Trey Mann hits 6K, I'm going to continue to be significantly over the field on Trey Mann here. And then we know the upside Cody Martin has as well. He's definitely viable, but I like Trey Mann a bit more than Martin. So yeah, love these guys. Love these guys. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I feel like I haven't seen Zion recently, so I don't really know how he's looking, but we know that's not his strong suit. All right, next up we have the Jazz going up against the Hornets. Again, a game environment I like, but the Jazz use a lot of bodies, and that's what always concerns me. But there are two, to me, relatively obvious plays. To me, Keontae George at 4,700 playing at least 30 minutes a game is, like you're saying, Donnie. Keontae George is the play at 4,700. We don't have a lot of value on this slate. He makes a lot work. I'm not trying to overthink it. I easily could, but I am just going to allow Keontae George to show up as much as he needs to, and I'm okay with that. Walker Kessler is the guy that I'm going to force exposure to. He wasn't showing up in my early runs, so if I need to, I will put 15-20% min on him, if not higher, because I love playing bigs against the Hornets. They're still the worst in the league at that, at giving up a shit ton of points to bigs, and so Kessler's the focal point for me once again here. And then Sexton, Collins, Clarkson, Markkanen, they're all viable. I would love to see them show up a good bit, but as of right now, I'm not going to force it. There's only 20 lines I'm using tonight, so I can't keep forcing exposure to everybody I like on this slate, even though there are quite a few of those. So Kessler and George are the priority focal point players. We'll love to see other people from the Jazz show up as well. Good game environment for me that I think is going a little underrated. Next up, we have the last game on the slate, Wizards against the Nuggets. Wizards are pretty healthy. Kyle Kuzma was not on the injury report. If he was, that would make this game slightly more interesting, maybe. We know Deni Avdija has plenty of upside. Marvin Bagley at 5,300. Tattoo, I know you mentioned him. He's definitely viable, but again, I'm not overly excited about it. I have a little bit of exposure to him naturally, around field weight exposure, 20%, and I'm okay with that. I'm not jumping to play him. I'm not trying to avoid it. I'll just let the DS make that decision for me. Matchup against the Nuggets, we talk about it all the time. Going up against Jokic is not a tough matchup per se. He's not the greatest defender, but he can get players into foul trouble. Marvin Bagley tends to struggle with foul trouble, and he's looking a little chalky. Those are narratives, but those are still things that tend to happen sometimes. So if Marvin Bagley ends up being a core play for me, I am going to cap him, so he's not going to be in 100% of my lines. But ideally, I'll be in that 25 to 30 range. I don't really want to go too much higher there, but we'll see. You have to work with the optimizer sometimes to get what you want, and if that means I have to bite the bullet and play a little bit more Bagley than I'm comfortable doing, we'll see it on the pre-lock show. And then outside of that, we have the Nuggets going up against the Wizards. We know the Wizards are a god-awful team. You can definitely fade Jokic tonight. I say it all the time. Chalkiest stud on the slate. You can always fade, especially on a 10-game slate. As of right now, I'm forcing exposure to Jokic, but I am contemplating potentially fading him. I haven't made a firm decision there. The matchup is great. Game environment is solid, but what concerns me is the spread, and I can see this game getting out of hand very fast. If Jamal Murray wasn't going to play, it would be an easy Jokic moment, but I'm really debating it. I do like Jamal Murray, even with the wide spread at 8K. I think he can pay off his price tag in that amount of time. So he is probably going to be a leverage play for me tonight. Just given the soft matchup, low ownership, decent game total, it makes him stand out for me and the sim model. Jokic, I really am going back and forth on. I think I'm going to bite it unless there's another stuff that really starts to stand out for me. But the more I think about it, it makes a little bit more sense to take a shot on SGA at super low ownership and then just take the bet and fade Jokic at 25% ownership when we know there's quite a few scenarios that could happen here where he doesn't exceed value. So that makes more sense to me now, but I'll have it all figured out by the time I get to the pre-lock show. Yeah, that's the thing. He has such an easy matchup. We just have to see if that game can stay close. If Jokic was lower owned, I would play him all day here. But with him being projected for 23% ownership is making me think about how can I fade this. And I always do that when I see really chalky guys. It's just in NBA, it's rare that you really want to fade the chalk too much, but this might be a good spot. What's up, Coach Chris? Glad you're able to make it. Anyway, y'all, we have an interesting 10-game slate. As you can see, there's quite a few viable pivots. There's some very obvious plays and soft matchups that have some risk involved there too. So I'm interested in seeing what me and Brandon can map up today on the pre-lock show. It's going to be a good one. I'll see you all at 5:30 p.m. if you're able to make it. If not, I'll see you all here again tomorrow. Same time. Peace out, guys. Bye.